The Rebbe starts off the Sicha by saying that we discussed many times that Pirush Rashi ala Torah, although he's of course coming to explain the simple meaning of the Psukim, as Rashi himself emphasizes many times, and already right in the first Seder he says, V'ani lo ibasi ala l'pshuta, I'm only coming to explain the simple meaning. But Rashi also contains in Yanim Ufloim very, very amazing aspects of the other parts of the Torah as well, even the secrets of the Torah, as it's known, the Vort of the Alter Rebbe, that Rashi and Chumash is Yeinu Shol Torah, contains the wine of Torah. But in order to be able to appreciate and understand these in Yanim Ufloim, these amazing and fascinating things, and the Yeinu Shol Torah within Rashi, we first need to learn and understand the simple meaning of the Rashi, because also these amazing, fascinating aspects of Rashi and the Yeinu Shol Torah Rashi had put inside this Pshutei Shel Mikra. So also in our Parsha, says the Rebbe, we find a Pirush of Rashi which contains in Yanim Ufloim amazing aspects in the area of halacha, and so to Yeinu Shol Torah. But first we need to explain the Pirush HaPashut of the Rashi. So the Rebbe is discussing over here the psukim that are describing how Yeshua and Kalev are speaking to the Bnei Yisrael after the Miraglim's report, and Yeshua and Kalev are speaking to the Bnei Yisrael regarding going into Eretz Yisrael. So the pasuk says, Ach ba Hashem al timroidu, do not rebel against Hashem. The atem al tiru es hamoretz, not to be afraid of the people of the land. Ki lachmeinu heim, they are our bread. Sar tzilom, their shade has been removed, as Rashi will explain soon what that means. And the Rebbe is going to look at three Rashis on this pasuk. So Rashi quotes first the words al timroidu, do not rebel. And Rashi says, Vishuv v'atem al tiru. You won't rebel, then, as a result of that, al tiru, you won't be afraid. So the Mefarshim explained that Rashi is coming to explain that the flow of the pasuk, the al tiru, is not a separate statement, don't be afraid, but al tiru is as a result of al timroidu, you won't rebel, and then al tiru. If you won't rebel against Hashem, then also you won't fear the nations. And what's forcing Rashi to say this is, one way of understanding it is the change of order within the words of the pasuk. By al timroidu, it first says, Bahashem, whom you're not going to rebel against. Bahashem al timroidu. Then by al tiru, it first says al tiru, and then it says es amo oretz. From this, Rashi understands that these two statements are connected to each other. In other words, you won't rebel, and straight from not rebelling, as a result of that, you won't fear. Another explanation is because rather than saying vi al tiru, which would then make it as another statement, it says vi'atem. It says Vashem al timroidu, vi'atem, and you, which makes it sound like it's continuing from the previous part. And that's why Rashi says that al timroidu is al tiru is as a result of al timroidu. However, the Rebbe says this explanation is difficult because according to this, in Rashi's Dibur HaMaschil, he should have first of all quoted the word Bahashem. Also, the later words, V'atem al tiru es amo oretz, or at least hinted it through a v'goymer, which are the words, according to these Mefarshim, that are forcing Rashi's Pirush. From the fact that Rashi does not bring the word Bahashem, or the later words in the pasuk, V'atem al tiru es amo oretz, is understood, that what's forcing Rashi to explain it this way is mainly not so much these words of the pasuk, but more the general idea of al timroidu, of what the Yeshua and Kalev are saying, don't rebel, which are the words that Rashi quotes. The Rebbe moves on to the next Rashi. On the words ki lachmeinu heim, they are our bread. Rashi explains it means noichleim kalechem, will eat them like bread. So the Rebbe asks, number one, what's Rashi's chidush? It seems to be obvious that if we're speaking about people and we say lachmeinu heim, they are our bread, obviously they're not bread in the simple sense. So it's an expression that it's going to be easy to win them as easy as eating bread. So what's Rashi telling us? On the other hand, if what it's trying to tell us is that it's going to be as easy as eating, so why bread specifically? What's the difference if it's bread or another type of food? It could have said simply, Noichleim, we'll eat them. So why does the pasuk say lachmeinu? Why does Rashi have to emphasize kalechem? And then the Rebbe says, on the contrary, Rashi should have explained that lachmeinu actually means we'll eat them like food, not like bread. As we find a number of places in Torah that lechem is just a general reference to all types of food. And finally asks the Rebbe, why is Rashi quoting also the word of the pasuk ki lachmeinu? Why is ki relevant over here? Rashi doesn't seem to be explaining the word ki. The Rebbe now moves to the next Rashi. The pasuk says, Sar Tzilam, their shade was removed. Rashi explains what this means is Maginam v'choskom, their protection, their strength. Ksherim shabahem mesu, the ones that were kosher, the good ones amongst these nations have died. More specifically, it's referring to Eoiv that was protecting them. He has died. That's Rashi's first pirush. Another pirush on Tzilam, it means the shade of Hashem was removed from them. The protection, the shade of Hashem was removed from them. So we need to understand, why does Rashi need two pirushim? What is the advantage in each one of them? So the Rebbe starts explaining the Rashis in the following way. What's forcing Rashi to say va'atem al tiru, that you won't be afraid, is as a result of al timroidu, don't rebel against Hashem, and not that it's a separate statement for itself, don't be afraid, is because earlier on the Meraglim had argued that az ha'am yeshiv ba'aretz, the people of the land are so strong and powerful. They say they see these huge people, giants. We felt like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and that's the way we were viewed by these giants as well. Now Yeshua and Kalev don't come along and disregard these claims or contradict these claims. So the question then is, how are Yeshua and Kalev expecting that the people shouldn't be afraid of the people of the land without giving any sort of explanation? Why, Altiru? Why shouldn't you be afraid? The question is even stronger later on in the Parsha. When the Yidden hear that they're not going to be allowed in Eretz Yisrael, the pasuk says, "Vayashkimu b'boiker," they get up in the morning early. They said, "Hinenu v'alinu," we just want to go to Eretz Yisrael. Moshe Rabbeinu says, "Don't go, so you won't be destroyed by the Amaleki, by the Knani." It sounds like even Moshe Rabbeinu is saying that there's plenty what to be afraid of these goyim. So why are Yeshua and Kalev saying, Al Tiru, don't be afraid? Another question. With the words Ba'Hashem Al Timroidu, don't rebel against Hashem, Yeshua and Kalev clearly mean to say they should fulfill what Hashem says, go to Eretz Yisrael. So seemingly they should have said that directly. They should have said that specifically. Let's go to Eretz Yisrael. What is this general claim of Ba'Hashem Al Timroidu, don't rebel against Hashem? It is these questions that Rashi is coming to answer with saying that Al Timroidu, don't rebel against Hashem, leads directly into Va'atem Al Tiru, then automatically you won't be afraid. What Yeshua and Kalev are saying is that not being afraid is as a result of not rebelling. That means, yes, it's true that the people of the land are strong, and seemingly there's plenty room to be afraid of them. Nevertheless, if Al Timroidu, if you don't rebel against Hashem, if you do what Hashem wants, then there's no room, even according to nature, there's no room to be afraid of. Even for a strong nation, because you have Hashem with you. And this is why Yeshua and Kalev are saying Ba'Hashem Al Timroidu. They don't just say, let's go to Eretz Yisrael, because once Ba'Hashem Al Timroidu, once you don't rebel against Hashem, then it completely removes all of the claims that the people are strong, and therefore, why Al Tiru, why they shouldn't be afraid, because once they don't rebel against Hashem, then there's nothing to be afraid, and automatically they'll be able to go into Eretz Yisrael. Says the Rebbe, now we can understand how the next Rashi flows and follows directly from this. Ki lachmeinu heim, they are our bread. Noichleim kalechem, will eat them as bread. What does this mean? Says the Rebbe, the word lachmeinu over here can actually be translated as bread in the literal sense, and therefore it should be translated in that way. So what would have we thought if not for Rashi? If not for Rashi, we would have understood Lachmeinu Heim as meaning that going into Eretz Yisrael and conquering the people there is as necessary as much as bread is necessary. And that would tell us the comparison to bread specifically, and also what it means, Ki Lachmeinu Heim, because they are our bread. Perhaps what the Meraglim was saying was, Al Tiru es Am Haaretz, don't be afraid of these people, because Lachmeinu, because they are our bread, meaning to conquer them and to go into Eretz Yisrael is an absolute necessity, and therefore you absolutely cannot be afraid of them. But since we explained already that Va'atem Al Tiru is not because they are a necessity, not because they are our bread, we're explaining Va'atem Al Tiru is because you're not going to rebel against Hashem, because we're going with a koyach of Hashem. So we cannot say anymore that the reason you're not afraid of them is because they are a necessity as bread. Also, says the Rebbe, if really they are a necessity to go into Eretz Yisrael, then how did the Yidden manage the next 39 years not going into Eretz Yisrael? And this is why Rashi says, Noichleim kalechem. The comparison to bread specifically is not about how necessary it is, but rather in the way it's eaten. We're going to conquer Eretz Yisrael, Noichleim, we're going to have them like eating bread. What does this mean? What's this idea of bread specifically? Rashi doesn't have to tell us. The Ben Chamish Mikra learned earlier in Shlach already, something that Rashi said regarding lechem. Rashi told us that the bread that the Yidden had asked Hashem in a proper and appropriate way, Hashem is going to give it to them. This is referring to the man, derech chiba, in a loving way, with a shining face. So when it comes over here to our pasuk lachmeinu heim, and we say noichleim kalechem, we're going to eat them as bread, we understand that this means that Hashem is going to give the goyim, the conquering of the goyim, the consumption of these goyim in a way of derech chiba, also in a loving way, with a shining face, just like He gives them the bread. And therefore that makes the reason much stronger of why you're not going to be afraid of them. Ki lachmeinu heim. There's absolutely nothing to be afraid of them, because Hashem is giving them to us in a loving way, with a shining face, as we said before. Now the Rebbe moves to the two pirushim on Sor Tzilam, which again we explained. The first pirush was that their strength, ksherim shebahem mesu, the kosher ones amongst them died, Eev died, and the second pirush was that the shade of Hashem was removed from them. So the Rebbe starts off by explaining, we can understand the advantage of the second pirush, why Rashi needs a second pirush. And that is from Rashi's words himself. How is that? In his pirush, Rashi says, Tziloi shel amokim, the shade of Hashem, sor me'aleim, was removed from over them. Whereas in the beginning of the Rashi, when Rashi quotes the words of the pasuk, which the words of the pasuk apply for both pirushim equally, Rashi only quotes the word sor tzilam. He doesn't bring the word me'aleim from the pasuk. That means the word me'aleim in the second pirush of Rashi is actually the key to why Rashi needs that second pirush. How is that? When we say the word sor, especially sor me'aleim, it means that whatever it was that was moved went away from where it was, me'aleim, from over the nations in this particular case, and right now is somewhere else. It means it still exists later on, so it's just not where it was before. The problem with the first pirush in saying this is, if we're saying Shedim Shabam Mesu, that the righteous ones amongst them died, that means this tzeil, this protection that they had, is completely not here anymore. So you can't say Sor, that it just moved, and surely not Sor Me'aleim, and moved from over them, because whoever died is completely gone. And this is why Rashi is giving us a second pirush, and he says Tzilam is referring to the shade of Hashem. The problem, however, is, according to this, the word Sor and Sor Me'aleim definitely fits very well now, because the tzeil of Hashem, the shade of Hashem, always exists. And as the pasuk says, Hinni mekim es brisi itchem es zara machareichem es kol nefesh achaya, the Eibishter establishes his covenant to all of Noach's children, to all of the goyim, etc., to protect them, and so on and so forth. V'rachmav kol ma'asav, Hashem's mercy is always on all of His creations. However, so Hashem's mercy is always there, Hashem's protection is always there. But in this particular case, Sor Me'aleim, on these goyim, Hashem is now removing that so that the Yidden will be able to conquer them. But the truth of the matter is that even according to the first pirush, although this is a little bit difficult, Sor Me'aleim, but B'doichek, at least we would be able to say what Sor Me'aleim means, even though we said that the Kshedim Shabam Mesu, then seemingly they're gone. Now what do we mean? It just moved away somewhere else. It was removed. So we could still B'doichek explain it as the Rebbe is about to explain, and therefore Rashi does bring it, the first pirush, and in fact he brings it as the first pirush, because in some ways it's much stronger and closer to Pshuti Shel Mikra, as we'll see. How would we be able to explain Sor Me'aleim according to the first pirush? Because when Yeshua and Kalev are saying Sor, Tzilam, that their shade was removed, and according to Rashi's first pirush, it would mean that Kshedim Shabam, the righteous ones, died. They're not coming to speak about these. Their focus is not what happened to these people that are gone now. The focus is the people of the land who were being protected. So therefore, the main point is they don't have their protection anymore, and therefore you don't have to be afraid of them. So it's not so relevant really what happened to them, whether they're gone completely or not gone completely. What's mostly relevant is the people, the nations that are remaining in the land don't have that protection anymore. And therefore, you could still sort of say Tsar Tzila Me'aleim, in other words, there's nothing to be afraid of them because they don't have their tzeil, even though technically regarding these ksherim, they're not only moved somewhere else, but they're completely gone because they died. Now we understand that this is a little bit of a doichik, and therefore Rashi does bring the second pirush. On the other hand, this pirush of Maginam v'choskam, the first pirush of Rashi, that Sar Tzila means their strength was removed, their protection was removed, their kosher ones had died. Says the Rebbe, this one still is a very, very strong pirush, and on the contrary, in simple pshat of the pasuk, it makes more sense. It's more fitting, and that's why Rashi is going to bring it first. Because since the psukim are speaking about the goyim, it makes more sense that when you say the word silam, their tzeil, their shade, it makes sense to say that it's referring to ksherim shabahem, the righteous ones of amongst them. Not the shade of Hashem, especially then it should have just said sor hatzeil. And therefore, according to Rashi, this pirush of that it means the kosher ones of them, the righteous ones of them died, which means their protection, the ones from amongst them, Rashi brings that as the first and main pirush. From here, the Rebbe now moves on to what was discussed in the beginning of the Sicha, the Inyanim Mufloim in Pirush Rashi. And the Rebbe says these two Pirushim of Rashi are dependent on Machloikus of the Rambam and the Ravid. And we seem to be going off in a totally different direction now, but it'll all be brought back very soon. The Rambam paskins that the Shechita of a Goy, Akum, someone that serves Avodah Zarah, is a Nevela, is considered Nevela, and therefore it causes what's called a Tumah of if someone carries it, it causes Tumah. Metamo Bamasa. The Rambam says this is true whether it's someone that serves Avodah Zarah or a Kusi or even a Ger Toshav. All of these people, Shchitasa Nevela, their Shchita is considered a Nevela. The Rambam goes on to say, that it seems to me that this is a midrabanon, because the whole concept of tumas avodah zarah and anything that was brought to avodah zarah is all midrabanon, and therefore the shchita of this guy is also midrabanon. The Ravid argues in the Rambam and says the goyim are like behemoths. They cannot make other things tamei. They cannot become themselves tamei. They are called am hadoyim lechamoyer. They're compared to a donkey. Or as it says, Hein goyim kimar midli, the goyim are like a drop in the bucket. And ve'eskulam yisaruach, he says, they could all just be carried away with the wind. Anyone that considers the goyim as anything, it's like taking a bunch of ear in your hands. So in other words, they're not considered anything at all. The Kasef Mishnah asks on the Ravid, how is this relevant over here to the fact that the goyim don't make tummy and don't become tummy themselves? Here we're speaking not about the goyim themselves, whether they are making something tummy or not. We're speaking about their shchita. What's the status of their shchita? So the Rogatchover comes along and explains what the Ravid is saying. What he's saying is that when could you say that the shchita could come and ruin something and make something into a nevela, is only if the shoichet is a metzias, is an existence according to halacha. If, however, as the Ravid puts it, the goyim are nothing, then you can't say that you should ruin something either. And this is what the Ravid is trying to say. The akum, the goyim are like behemoths and they don't become tamei, they don't make things tamei, or they're just like ear, they're just like heder, they're absent, it's like not a metzias at all, so you can't say that their shchita should come along and make something into a nevela. And therefore, the Ravid would learn that the reason why the shchita of a goy is a nevela is not because it's as if he shechted it and he ruined something and he messed something up, but because of a totally different reason. The shchita of a goy is not considered shchita at all. And therefore, it's a nevela. It would be more like a behemoth that had just died on its own. The Rebbe explains, why does the Ravid bring in this whole idea of ein mitamin of ein mitamin? That they don't make things tummy and they don't become tummy themselves. Seemingly, according to the beer of the Rogatchover, all that matters is that they're not a metzias, that they're not in existence. Why is it relevant over here, this whole concept of tumah, that they don't make things tummy, etc.? Says the Rebbe, we can explain that everyone agrees, even the Ravid would agree, that in certain aspects of halacha, the goyim definitely are some sort of metzias. For example, we have the dinim of the avodah zarah of a goy, which would be asur bahana, even to a yid, and other halachas that are relevant to goyim. And therefore, the Rambam can't just come along and say the goyim are nothing or they're like behemoths, in all, as a blanket statement. And therefore, the Ravid has to say they don't make things tummy, they don't become tummy. In other words, as far as the dinim of tumah, they are like behemoths, or they're like non-existent. To use the Ravid's term, asaf ruach b'chafnav, he's gathering wind in his hands. And therefore, According to the Ravid, it wouldn't be possible that the behemoth that they shechted should become tummy because they are not shaykh to this whole concept of making things tummy. Says the Rebbe, this machloikus between the Rambam and the Ravid, whether the goyim are considered a metzius in existence, or they are more like heder, they're absent, they're not a non-existence, also brings to another lishitosayu, in other words, another machloikas that would be in regards to goyim in connection to the whole idea of hashgacha pratis. According to the Rambam, which we said they are a metzius, and therefore they're also begeder hashgacha pratis. They also fall under the category of hashgacha pratis in the most detailed way. According to the Ravid, on the other hand, which they are like a non-existence, so you don't have in them the regular concept of hashgacha pratis. Now, of course, as the Rebbe points out in the footnotes over here as well, doesn't mean there's absolutely no hashgacha pratis. We understand there's different levels of hashgacha pratis and so on and so forth. But there isn't the regular hashgacha pratis because they're a non-existent. You don't have the proper union of hashgacha pratis by them. As the Rebbe will explain some more of this later. Says the Rebbe, we can now say that these two pirushim of Rashi, whether tzilum, their shade, the shade of these goyim, refers to their own strength, their own protection, the righteous ones amongst them, or refers to the shade of Hashem, is dependent on these two opinions of the Rambam and the Ravid. According to Rashi's first pirush, Bnei Noach would be considered as heder, as a non-existence, more going according to the Ravid. And therefore you can't say that Tzilam refers to the shade of Hashem that was there previously, and now Sarmei Aleim now was removed from them, which would have shown that they are a real Metzius. And the proof would be if they have the shade of Hashem. What is a shade? The shade is usually going to be according to the Metzius of the existence of who the shade is from. The Rebbe says, just like a shadow in the simple sense, a tzeil is a shadow of a person. In a similar way, if we say the tzeil of the Hashem is on them, it would mean that Hashem is their shade, their shadow. It's measured according to them. But if they're a metzius of heder, if they're not a non-existence, they can't have that shade, so to speak, of Hashem. And as the Ragachover explains, and according to this, there's no geder of hashgacha pratis, according to the Ravid. And therefore, what we're going to have to say is that it's not referring to the shade of Hashem, the hashgacha pratis of Hashem over them. Rather, what we're going to say is their own strength, in other words, their own righteous ones died, but not that the shade or protection of Hashem was removed from them. However, according to the second pirush, the Bnei Noach Goyim are also considered in existence, which goes according to the Shita of the Rambam. They're also under the general category of Hashgacha Pratis. And therefore, you could say that Tzila means the shade of Hashem, the protection of Hashem. It refers Aleim, it refers to them. The Tzeil is their shade, it's their protection, it's connected to their Metzias. They are in existence. To explain this a little bit more, I'll be Pnimi Yisrael. The meaning of Tziloi Shel HaMokim, the shade of Hashem, or the shadow of Hashem, is, as Chassidus explains, that the pu'ulois, the deeds that a person accomplishes, when he accomplishes something up above, is connected to, related to the action that he did. You do something down here and it has an impact l'maylo. This is similar to the famous Pirush of the Baal Shem Tov on the Pasuk, Hashem tzilcha, Hashem is your shade or Hashem is your shadow. That according to the way a person acts down here, the things are happening l'maylo in a similar way. Just like the shadow of a person is following, is copying, is working according to the movements of the person. In a similar way, says the Rebbe, although not exactly again like by a Yid, but in a similar way, we also say by the Goyim, we say Tziloi Shel HaMokim, the shade of Hashem, that since Hashem doesn't hold back the reward for every single creature, so therefore, the things that they do down here, Kavayochel, are also causing something Lamaila, and that's the idea of the Tzeil. It's also bringing something Milamaila down to them. That means when they do a good deed, when they do the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach, they're going to get reward. And when they are being over in Aveira, so then again from above, there's going to come something to reciprocate for that as well. There's going to be something similar to that, similar to what they did. They caused a certain damage, and now there's going to be a certain punishment that's caused as a result of that. Says the Rebbe, but that only fits according to the Rambam, that the Umas Oilam, that the Goyim are a Metzias. Then you could say that the Hamshacha from above is going to go according to the specific thing that was done down here. This fits in with the whole idea that they are in the Geder of Hashgacha Pratis. However, according to the Ravid, which they're not like a non-existence, you can't say then that their Pu'ula, what they're doing, should draw down something similar to what they did from above. Because they're not within this Geder, as we said, of Hashgacha Pratis. There isn't this direct connection between their actions and what's going on above. So what does reward and punishment mean by, according to the Ravid? It's rather something that's coming in an automatic way, more in like a secondary way, as a result of why they're even created. The reason the Goyim are created is B'Shvil Yisrael, for the Yidden. Says the Rebbe, just like we find in regards to an animal, we also find what seems to be something like reward and punishment, but of course it works in a very different way. The Torah says, when a certain thing happened, a certain Aveira happened to the person as a result of the Behema, so the animal gets killed. Now the animal, of course, you can't say the animal sinned, as the expression is Behema Machata, what did the Behema sin? But because a certain stumbling block happened to the person as a result of the Behema, so therefore we punish the Behema as well. But it's not the regular category of punishment. Rather, since the whole point of the animal is to assist the person, so if the Behema is not assisting the person, but rather causing damage, then there's no room for this animal anymore. So we say, Vesa Behema Ta'aroigu. Says the Rebbe, in a similar way is what we would say, according to the Ravid, the way reward and punishment works by the Goyim. Since the whole purpose of the world is B'Shvil Yisrael, for the Yidden, so it has to be that even the mitzvahs that the Bnei Noach get is very different. It's not like the mitzvahs that the Yidden get, which the purpose is those mitzvahs itself. Rather, the Goyim and even their mitzvahs is all secondary, it's all B'Shvil Yisrael. And as discussed in the past at length, that their mitzvahs are for Yishuv Oilam, so that the world should be able to be a settled, proper place, so that the Yidden can be able to work with this world and make it a dira for Hashem through their Torah and mitzvahs. And therefore, their reward and punishment for their Shavim mitzvahs b'nei Noach is more like a natural result that comes out of the purpose of why they're here. In other words, if they're not fulfilling the purpose, then automatically there's no room for them either. And says the Rebbe, now we can also understand why we don't find different kind of punishments for the different Aveirus of Bnei Noach. Rather, it's all always the same thing. There's just Misa. Because it's just one general thing. They didn't fulfill their tachlis. They don't belong here anymore. This is very different to the concept that we spoke before, which would be, according to the Rambam, the concept of a tzeil, more like a shadow, which the shadow is specifically being changed according to what the person is doing. Not just one general category, an idea whether the person is doing the right thing or the wrong thing, but very much being impacted by every activity of the person. Says the Rebbe, now we could see the chiluk b'pnimi yisanyanu and also al derech halacha in these two pirushim of Rashi. The first pirush is going according to the Ravid. B'nei Noach, as we said, are begeder head. They're like absent, a non-existence. So therefore, the reward and punishment is just like an automatic thing, based on if they're doing the right or the wrong things. And therefore Rashi says, Tzilam is not referring to the shade of Hashem. Rather, it's speaking to their own strength, their own protection. In other words, when they have people that are righteous, so they automatically, that strengthens them. But it's not that they're accomplishing anything l'mayla. Whereas according to the second Pirush of Rashi, that's according to the Rambam, that they are a Metzius, and there is Hashgacha Pratis. And therefore, as we're soon going to conclude, therefore there is the shade of Hashem upon them being impacted by their pu'ulos. Now, even though, of course, also according to the Rambam, the Metzius of Bnei Noach and their Sheva mitzvahs are also for the Yidden, but nevertheless, since they did get they were commanded for their mitzvahs, especially the Sheva mitzvahs, the Eibishter commanded in the Torah and let it be known through Moshe Rabbeinu. So we have to say that when they are fulfilling the mitzvah of the Eibishter, they are accomplishing something like that also in what's being drawn down B'Lamayla. And therefore you could use, as Rashi says, Tziloi Shalamakam, the shade of Hashem, is coming down in a specific way to them, according to their particular action, and that's why it could be called Tzilam, their own shade. Says the Rebbe, based on all of this, we can now explain what seems to be a little bit not understood in the flow of the Psukim and in Rashi. And the Rebbe asks a few questions. Number one, why are Yeshua and Kalev even adding this point of Sor Tzilo Me'aleim? They had said earlier, Im Chafetz Banu, if Hashem wants us, then we'll be able to go in, etc. We understand that that's a necessity. You have to say that. The fact that they said don't rebel and then you won't be afraid, Rashi explained already that once you, as we explained earlier, that once you don't rebel against Hashem, you won't be afraid. We're going with the power of Hashem, and therefore, even according to nature, there's absolutely no room for any fear of the people. And as we also explained, like bread that Hashem is giving them all over to us, in a loving way, but with a shining face, etc. All of that is describing the situation of how Yidden are and how they need to be, etc. Why is it relevant to let us know what's going to be with the people? That Sar Tzilim, that their shade has been removed. Or to put it in a little bit of different words, Im Chafetz Banu Hashem. If Hashem wants to give it to us, He'll give us the land, and we won't rebel against Hashem, so we won't be afraid. But why is it relevant to know, for us to know what's happening with their protection? Whatever is supposed to happen will happen. Hashem is taking care of us. Another question that Rebbe has is, if we're going to consume them, then obviously they don't have their protection, they don't have their strength. So why do we have to say Sar Tzilim? Another question. Later in the pasuk it says again, Al Tirom, don't be afraid of them. And furthermore, we just said that it's enough Al Timroidu, as long as you don't rebel, automatically you won't be afraid. And now suddenly you have to say, oh, Hashem is with us, so don't be afraid. What's going on over here? Says the Rebbe, so to explain this, in conquering Eretz Yisrael, there was actually 3 categories of people. There were those that died. There were those that were chased away, immediately chased away, so they're completely gone also. And then there is those that will be driven away after the Yidden fill up the land and multiply, etc., etc. And in the meantime, they were the servants of the Yidden, and as the pasuk refers to them as lachmeinu, we're consuming them as bread and so on. In continuation to all of, and how it fits with everything we said before, says the Rebbe like this. Even according to Rashi's second Pirush, that by Goyim there is also this concept of Tzilui Shalom Akim, Hashem's protection, the Hashgacha Pratis, as the Rambam says. We also understand that it's definitely in no way similar to the Hashgacha Pratis that exists for Yidden. As said before, it's only the mitzvahs of Yidden that we say that the purpose is in them itself and not for something else. And this is what Yeshua and Kalev are emphasizing. The first thing is they're coming to deal with the argument of Aza'am, that the people are strong. So they say, Ba'Hashem al timroidu, don't rebel against Hashem, and then you have nothing to be afraid of. You won't be afraid. There's nothing to be afraid of the people of the land, no matter what's happening with the people. Because we don't rebel against Hashem, there's absolutely nothing to be afraid of the people. Then they add, and they say furthermore, Sar Tzilo Me'aleim. And this is needless to say, according to the first Pirush of Rashi, that they don't have their strength anymore, but even according to the Pirush about the shade of Hashem is no longer on them. And furthermore, they say, Hashem is Itanu, He's only with us. Where is Hashem? Completely the opposite of Sar Tzilim. Hashem has gone away from the Goyim, and where is Hashem? With us. In other words, not only the Yidden are not missing the protection of Hashem, but furthermore, Hashem Itanu, Hashem is with us. What does it mean with us? By the Goyim, the Hashgacha of Hashem, even when it is there, it's in a way of tzeil, like a shade or a shadow, which is makif, which is surrounding on top of them, but not inside of them. But by the Yidden, when the Eibishter is not only like a tzeil, makif, but rather Hashem Itanu, Hashem with His Hashgacha is one with us. And therefore it's understood that that brings to even furthermore, not only Al Tiru Es Am Haaretz, but also Al Tiraum. Just plain Al Tiraum, meaning to say not only when they're no longer Am Haaretz, because they're given over to us, but there's still some sort of existence, lachmeinu, but rather they completely become no metzias at all, because Sar Tzilum Aleim, because their protection is completely gone. Says the Rebbe, this also fits with the 3 categories that we're told that there's loisachaya kol neshama, the concept of completely eradicating the goyim. There is the idea of asu shalom, of those that make peace and are going to serve the Yidden, and then there are those girgoshi that were removed, they ran away, and they went to Africa. And the Rebbe concludes, just before concluding, that just l'cha'odah, the 3 things that the Rebbe is saying over here is that mitzad the inyan of al tiro, don't be afraid of them. As long as you don't rebel against Hashem, You have nothing to be afraid of them. That means even as they're right here, they do exist, but we have nothing to be afraid of them. And then there's Sartzilom, the idea of their protection being removed, and therefore, ultimately, they get chased away. They get chased away, immediately get chased away. And then there's the idea of the Hashem Itana, that because Hashem is only with us, this is the other point that the Rebbe is saying, is that inside this, the Goyim are completely gone, that they're completely destroyed, etc. If I understood correctly, these three things. And the Rebbe says, Soif, Soif. As the Gemara says about those people that went to Africa, when they came and they tried to claim against the Yidden, but then the Yidden answered them back, and the Yidden eventually, as the Gemara describes, got all of their fields as they were sown and their vineyards as they were plowed, so the Yidden completely took over even those things that they had left behind.